Welcome to another Chalk or Not segment. This week we're covering UFC 314, where we have a total of 7 chalky spots that we need to consider whether we should be chalking it or not. And obviously my definition for what chalk is anything that is minus 185 or wider is considered chalk. Anything less than that, I won't be covering in this segment. So again, I got my full card breakdown that I dropped on Sunday. I'll have my quick picks up for you guys on Wednesday. So a ton of other places for you guys to seek out the fights that I don't cover on this segment. So again, this is just to help the parlay boys out there to try to avoid some potential landmines or anybody looking to take a chalky spot straight up. I'll let you know my advice and my suggestion in terms of how you should be approaching some of these matchups. All right, reminder, there is PFL going down this week as well, and I'll have the full card breakdown for that on Wednesday. So stay tuned for that. Pretty much done breaking down that entire card for the Patreon folks. Link for that is obviously in the description for the MMA LOT and Patreon page. Just waiting on new odds for the Juliana Velasquez and Ekaterina Shakalova fight. And once that drops, I'll have that prediction or that full card broken down for the Patreon folks. And then obviously Wednesday for the YouTube folks. So stay tuned for that. All right. Without further ado, let's get right into this bad boy for the chalk or not. First matchup up we're going to talk about is Marco Tulio coming in at minus 340 going up against Trishan Gore. Now, Tulio has a significant experience advantage over Gore, who normally would rely on his power punching approach and some nasty kicks to try to get his wins. But recently, we've been seeing him look to get to his grappling game. And even though he hasn't been all that successful with getting opponents down and controlling them, he's managed to find ways to open up the neck of his opponents, where it seems he has a crazy squeeze because he's forced back-to-back guillotine submission wins and forced back-to-back opponents to tap out to those submissions. Tulio is obviously, in my opinion, a little bit more well-rounded, has a decent striking game, very strong, very physically imposing, trains alongside Charles Oliveira in that camp down there at Shoot to Box Diego Lima. My question mark here as to why Tulio Silva is so big of a favorite. His defensive striking, not the greatest. Like, we've seen him put him in some bad spots by lesser opponents than Gore. And I wouldn't be surprised if Gore is able to utilize his explosivity and his speed to actually land that big shot on Tulio. So, I expect this to be a somewhat chaotic fight. And even if Tulio has those advantages, I think even at minus 340, over 75% indicated, I think that's a little bit too wide here. Again, the experience advantage in my prediction is going to be Tulio, but given how chaotic this fight could end up being, you can't count out Gore's ability to land that big shot on Tulio and put him away as well. So unfortunately for Tulio backers, I'm going to have to put him in the not chalk-worthy category. The second spot here that we're going to talk about is Michal Oleksiejczuk coming in at minus 190 going up against Cedric Dumas. Interesting line movement here, as we did see Oleksiejczuk closer to minus 225 a few days ago, now down to minus 190, meaning that there is love coming in on Dumas, and I have to agree with it. Oleksiejczuk is one of my favorite fighters, and the fact that he likes to crash the pocket often with a combination, loves to work the body of his opponents and slowly wear them down and try to get them out of there. Unfortunately, the rest of his game has a lot of holes in it, specifically his grappling game, where we've seen opponents take him to the ground and most of his losses coming by submission. It would not surprise me if Dumas's mobility, his footwork from distance causes Oleksiejczuk some frustration here. And then from there, we see Dumas able to engage in the clinch, drag this fight to the ground, and implement some of his choke game that we've seen be successful for him in the past. I'm not a big Dumas fan. I'm even a bigger Oleksiejczuk fan, if I'm being honest. But I think that Dumas presents some issues here that Oleksiejczuk might struggle with. Hence why I'm going to have to lean on Oleksiejczuk not being chalk-worthy. All right, next up, Julian Erosa coming in at minus 330, going up against the veteran of veterans here, Darren Elkins. Now, we obviously know that Erosa is a more dangerous striker here, has some nasty elbows and some good knees. Obviously has a nasty guillotine choke as well. But is he going to be able to catch a guy as wild and erratic as Elkins in that? You have to consider that Elkins has only been submitted once throughout his illustrious career, and that one came against Charles Oliveira 15 years ago. And Charles Oliveira is the UFC's record holder in submission victories in the UFC. So that's something to definitely consider there. Erosa could have success on the feet. I'm actually predicting him to win this fight by decision, as I think he'll be able to be a little bit more effective with a damage-based approach. But you can't count out the relentless wrestling and grappling of Elkins and his submission defense. We've seen him get caught in some bad submissions in the past, but he does a great job in terms of staying calm and disciplined and working out of those spots and then slowly wearing his opponents down and breaking them over the course of the last 2 rounds. Look for him to do the same thing here to Erosa potentially, and that could absolutely spoil some parlays. And it's hard to count out Elkins as an underdog. This guy always makes it a tough night for his opponents, and if Erosa can't get him out of there early, this will surely play out closer than the minus 330 indicates. So once again, gotta go not chalk-worthy for Julian Erosa. All right, next up, we got Chase Hooper coming in at minus 900, going up against the veteran Jim Miller, who owns the most UFC appearances with 43, if I'm not mistaken, is second behind Charles Oliveira in terms of finishes and submissions in the UFC. And he's going up against the youngster Chase Hooper here, who will have a significant age or youth advantage, if that's what you want to call it. But we know what Hooper is great at, a submission wizard, a BJJ wizard. Is he going to be able to catch Miller in anything? I think Miller is the maybe slightly better striker, but the chaos in which Hooper initiates his striking could cause Jim some problems. But Miller is a solid submission specialist himself. He might be able to chew up the lead leg of Hooper a little bit, maybe land some big overhooks or overhands that we know he likes to throw. But once this gets into the grappling realm, this could be a bit of a scramble fest that Hooper may not be able to show a 90% implied odds type of performance as this line currently indicates. So I like Hooper. I'm picking him to win this fight, but minus 900 is just outrageous. No matter the discrepancy in skill, you need a complete tomato can going up against a guy for me to be willing to even consider minus 900. And Jim Miller, considering he has 43 UFC fights and has stayed on the roster for nearly, 17 years, clearly he is not a tomato can. Thus, I have to put Chase Hooper in the not chalk-worthy category. All right, next up, we got Nikita Krylov coming in at minus 185 going up against Dominic Reyes. Now, Krylov, also a guy that was a bigger favorite a few days ago, and there's clear action coming in on Dominic Reyes, and it makes sense. Krylov is a guy that likes to push a pace, likes to get to his grappling and slow guys down on the mat. But average striking game, has some decent power, but it seems at this stage of his career, he prefers to take opponents to the mat and grind them out from there. Reyes, kind of harder to take down, and I think he is a superior striker, but there are still some question marks in regards to his durability. If he can take a clean shot from Krylov here and gets knocked out badly, as we saw in 3 of his 4 losses during that 4-fight losing streak that he was on, it wouldn't be surprising. But if Krylov can't get the takedowns here, and Reyes is able to kind of start taking the command of this fight with his counter striking and with his superior combination striking altogether, that could cause Krylov a ton of trouble, and we might see him start to look frustrated and make decisions that Reyes is able to capitalize on. So I get a lot of people who are looking to fade Reyes in the past because of that losing streak he was on and the durability question marks, but you have to be considerate about the advantages he'll have in the technical striking realm that could cause a guy like Krylov some issues and frustration. Thus, this one was one of the harder ones to figure out, but I'm going to go not chalk-worthy for Nikita Krylov. All right, next up, we got Gene Silva coming in at minus 240 going up against Bryce Mitchell. Now, Mitchell's taking a ton of action because when I studied this matchup, Silva was closer to that minus 325, minus 350 line and now finds himself at minus 240. Now, I see a ton of love for Mitchell out there, considering the grinding grappling approach he normally asserts against his opponents and often comes out successful with it. Where we know he struggles is when he can't get opponents to the ground and is forced to strike with better strikers, hence why we saw Josh Emmett send his head into orbit. Obviously, that is absolutely possible here with Gene Silva, but the question mark remains whether Silva has a good enough defensive grappling game to try to stifle that game of Mitchell and then get off on his striking game. I'm going to lean with yes. I know a lot of people are putting out that those clips of Jourdain taking down Gene Silva 3 times, but there was never a moment where Jourdain was able to settle on top and really get to his game. Everybody's cutting off those clips of those takedowns right at the moment that Gene Silva immediately works back to his feet. And then on the feet, we know there is a huge discrepancy there. So, I can understand why value hunters are looking to go out there and try to take advantage of Michal. I get the angle, but I think the explosivity and the, just a ball of energy that Gene Silva is going to make it very difficult for Michal to apply his grappling and be effective with it for a long period of time. He's going to have to strike with Gene Silva for a while here, and I think it's just a matter of time before Gene Silva lands that big shot and puts him away. Thus, at minus 240, considering everything else that I've said so far and all the guys that are not chalk-worthy, I'm going to say Gene Silva is chalk-worthy. It's just a feeling that I have in my gut in terms of his ability to shut down Bryce Mitchell's grappling and his control. And I think from there we'll see Silva dictate the striking and make Michal walk onto a big shot where he eventually knocks him out. All right, the last one here we're going to talk about is Yair Rodriguez coming in at minus 200, going up against Patrício Pitbull, who makes his UFC debut this weekend. Obviously, you know Pitbull as the Bellator legend, the former featherweight and lightweight champion. Tried going for that bantamweight title as well, but came up short against Sergio Pettis, and then followed that up with a knockout loss to Chihiro Suzuki at Super Risen 2. But he did manage to bounce back with a title defense over Jeremy Kennedy in his last outing. Here against Rodriguez, though, I think Pitbull will start to suffer in terms of the speed disadvantage he'll be at, as well as the length and reach that Rodriguez applies here. Going into researching this matchup, I fully expected to take the underdog shot on Pitbull, but I really think that Rodriguez is in a spot where he can snipe Pitbull from distance and utilize a higher output game to cause Pitbull trouble. Pitbull might be looking to get this into the grappling realm, but I don't think he'll be successful in doing so. And I really think people hammering Rodriguez for his last performance against Brian Ortega are overlooking the fact that he emptied his gas tank at elevation in the first round, trying to put away Ortega after he hurt him very badly. I think we'll see Rodriguez be a little bit more, better or a little bit more economical with his gas tank here, and I think that'll allow him to just snipe Pitbull from distance, and I think he eventually lands that knockout shot as well. As big of a fan as I am of Pitbull and acknowledge all the success that he had over in Bellator, I think this is a bad stylistic matchup for him, and I'm going to have to lean with Rodriguez here, and I don't mind the chalk on him at minus 200, thus I'll consider him to be chalk worthy. There you guys go. Very heavy on the not chalk-worthy side for this UFC 314 card. Again, not saying a lot of these guys won't win, but you will be sweating out some of these tickets a little bit more than you're expecting them to if you're considering some of these spots to be free squares. Just be very careful, mitigate some of your risk there. If you do find yourself on some of these not chalk-worthy spots, there are obviously very good hedge opportunities for a lot of these fights. You can obviously wait until Friday for that prop drop and see which props that I'm leaning on for some of these spots. But yeah, just be very wary for the chalky favorites on this UFC 314 card. All right. I'll see you guys again tomorrow for the PFL full card breakdown, as well as the quick picks version of this UFC 314 breakdown. See you guys then. Peace.